The Lewisburg Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers.
Thank you all for coming out, even though it's a holiday evening. I usually like to just talk a little bit about how I came to write the book, because it's an interesting journey, and I know some people here are probably writers in the making or currently writing, and it's really it's been an interesting long path, and it all leads up to how I came upon this story for the book. I never trained as a writer. I was first an investment banker out of college, and then I went to law school and I practiced law, and then I found myself back where I had been raised in suburban Connecticut with a baby and a plan to stay home with my kids while they were young. But I hadn't quite done the math on that, which, you know, if you have 3 kids and you stay home till they're all in kindergarten, that could be 10 to 12 years of staying home. And the other thing I had not anticipated was how I would react being home with my son. So he was about 9 months old, and I was, you know, when you're on the floor with your baby, some of you have done this, some of you not yet, but you will probably, and they have like these toys, and they'll have like a toy that'll have, you know, a blue ball and a green ball, and it has to fit into the blue hole or the green hole, and they're different sizes, so they learn to problem solve and color match and all these great things to learn. And all the parenting books had told me, don't do it for him, let him get frustrated, let him learn. And, you know, I was an overachiever. I had these careers, you know, so sitting on the floor with my son and watching, you know, him for 2 days, putting the blue ball in the green hole and not being able to help him, and thinking, oh my God, I'm either going to lose my mind or I'm going to like ruin my poor child by showing him that the blue ball goes in the blue hole. So I started to think about some things I had read when I was in college, like The Feminine Mystique, which was written by Betty Friedan. Some people know of this work, who was the pioneer of the feminist movement in the 60s. And her whole premise was about what it was like for educated working women to be in an affluent suburban setting where there really wasn't that much work to do. There was work to do, but it was redundant work. It was always about doing things for children or making beds and remaking beds. And it was one of the reasons that women started giving themselves permission to go into the workforce. So I was sitting on the floor with my child thinking, I am a case study from that book. I'm really going to lose my mind. So that's when I started writing, because I wanted to be home. I could see that I was adding value, and I was enjoying it. I really loved all those little moments that come in between the doing of things, the feeding and the baths. I loved that time with my child and all my children, but I needed something to think about and to be working towards while I was watching him figure out which ball to put in which hole. And so I decided to write a novel, and I thought, well, you know, how hard could that be? I read a lot of novels. I'm a lawyer. John Grisham was a lawyer. I love John Grisham, so I set out to write a legal thriller because, you know, why not? It took me about 3 years to finish, but it was a wonderful project, because I would think about it. When I was driving, I would think about my plot. When I was out jogging with a baby jogger, I'd think about my plot. And then I had maybe 6 or 7 hours I could steal during the week to write. So it took 3 years to finish the book. When I finished it, I knew it didn't read like a novel. The story was there, and I knew the story was sort of held together, but it just didn't read the way that other books read, and I couldn't figure it out. So I found a writing professor to read it and to tell me what was wrong with it. And it was a tremendous relief when he came back and said, this is a really good story, like you can tell a good story, but you have no idea how to write a novel. And I'll just give you a small example because any aspiring writers and trained writers in here will find it amusing. But I would, start out in chapter 1 and I would write, Sam Hunter was chased by the bad guys, and go on for pages. Then in chapter 2, well, Sam needs to tell Jane what happened because she's going to help him with the bad guys and all the stuff going on. So he's got to tell her everything that happened in chapter 1. And so I would have like pages of dialogue of him telling her everything that happened. And for writers in the room, you know that this problem can be solved with one sentence of narration that says, Sam told Jane what happened in chapter 1, and then you don't have to bore your reader for 10 pages. So I was making these very novice mistakes because I had not ever taken a class on novel writing. I really didn't know what I was doing, and it was, note to self. If I ever take up, free diving, I'm going to take a lesson first. But with his help, I revised this novel, and then that took a couple of years. I was having more babies, 3 in total. And then about a week after my 3rd son was born, I got an agent. And I did that the hard way by sending out many, many submissions. I was, 8 months pregnant at Kinko's, 50 pages to this one, 3 chapters and a 1-page synopsis to that one. I think I sent out 60 submissions to agents, and I had a couple of bites and then one who wanted to take me on. So fast forward a year of rejections, and I decided, I got back on my feet, with the sleeping, and I decided I'm going to try to write another novel because I have an agent, which is really like this great first step. And this was 2006, self-publishing was not what it is today. You had to kind of fork over a chunk of change and print a bunch of hard copies and find somewhere to store them. And we didn't have what we have now, which is really wonderful on Amazon and ebooks and print on demand, that you can self-publish and get started that way. So it was really important to have this agent. So I then wrote a novel called 4 Wives, which was all about suburbia. By then, I had really been living and breathing this life, and I saw all these issues that all my friends were always talking about with what it means to be a stay-home mom after having a career. So I wrote 4 Wives, and that actually got picked up by St. Martin's Press. And I thought, this is it. I'm a writer. I am now going to have a career. They're going to make the movie, and George Clooney's going to star in my movie, and I'm going to meet George Clooney, and it's all great. So I, was just on cloud 9, thinking I was fully launched, and then reality set in, and not all books become bestsellers and make a writer. Make a writing venture into a career. So first book, I think, sold under 10,000 copies. Thank you to all my friends and family for buying all of those copies. And the next one came out a year later, and it's a similar story. They didn't launch, they didn't take off. So at that point, I was divorced and had to really start thinking about what I was going to do to rebuild a career and be able to financially sustain myself in the future. And I decided to go back to practicing law. So the place that took me in happened to need a family law attorney. So I got retrained from corporate law to family law, divorce law. And I got some incredible training about psychology, and mostly with disorders that many people have heard of, borderline personality disorders, narcissism, things that tend to crop up a lot in dysfunctional families where guardians of children are needed in divorce cases. Those are usually, serious sort of custodial disputes. And so that will play into how I came upon the plot for All Is Not Forgotten. But as I was working as an attorney, and I did enjoy it. I was enjoying myself, and I was able to work part-time and still be home with my kids in the evenings. I just couldn't let go of this idea that I could be a writer. And I found myself continuing to come up with plots, continuing to follow what was trending and what was selling, and I just kept writing. It was much harder then to find time. I ended up writing a whole other women's fiction novel about family, and I found a new agent. And after working on that novel for a year and revising it for another year, she was very honest with me and said, I'm not going to be able to do what you need me to do. We're going to have another, book that gets out there, and, your friends and family will buy it and some other people, but it's not, the market for this is not what it needs to be to relaunch you. And you may only have one shot at relaunching. Many of you probably don't know this, but if you've had a couple of books that haven't taken off, it's very hard to get the booksellers to order the book because you have a bad track record. And some authors will actually change their name, slightly even, from, Jane Smith to J.B. Smith, or, using their initials because they want to get off that list and be new. It's very, very tough to do the slow build to success. So I cried for 2 days and decided that this was it. I'm going to mourn the loss of this dream. Like, this is it. This is crazy that I have been spending all of my free time writing. My kids were asking me, they would go with their dad, they'd come back, I would be exhausted, and they're like, what did you do all weekend? I'm like, I've been working on my novel. And they were like, why? Like, why didn't you go out with your friends, go to a movie? And I had times when I thought, no, I'm teaching them a great lesson. I am teaching them, do not give up on your dreams, work hard, never give up. That's what life is. It's about having big dreams and working hard at them. But then I had moments where I thought, maybe I'm just not emotionally healthy enough to let go of this failing dream. Sometimes you have to let go of things and move on and find other dreams. And I really didn't know. There were many moments when I thought I was teaching my kids how not to be emotionally healthy and to look for opportunities in life and move forward in a positive direction, but instead to hold on to something that's been really negative. And I struggled with that. But after 2 days, I called my agent back and I said, what is selling? I'm going to write one last book, and I'm going to do it differently this time. I have many stories to tell. I'm interested in so many things. I wrote a legal thriller. I wrote these, if I'm not stuck in the women's fiction genre and I can write anything, tell me what the editors are asking to buy, and I will find a story that interests me and I will write in that genre. And she said, well, everybody wants a psychological thriller. Everyone wants the next Gone Girl, the next Girl on a Train. And I had not read any of those books. I had no idea what she was talking about. I had seen them, but I hadn't read them. So I went and broke down these books, and I tried to figure out what it was that was appealing to people, why this new genre had sort of ignited this passion for thrillers. And if you break them down, what you find is that they have almost invariably a first-person narrator who is unreliable. And so I gave a lot of thought to what that was doing for readers. And I thought, too, about other forms of entertainment and how they had been changing. And if you notice, there's been this progression in film, television, and even now on Broadway with Hamilton, of telling similar stories but in a different way, and in a way that forces us to pay attention in a way we never had to before. So if you've seen Hamilton and also seen like Les Mis or something, or Phantom of the Opera, There are these epic stories, and they have these big concepts and a love story and all of these things going on. But what's different about Hamilton, to my mind, is that the music, the medium that you're receiving this information is so fast with the rap, and you cannot stop listening. There's no moment where you're like, oh, this song's been going on long, and you check your phone. You will miss something important. So you are forced to forget about your phone. You're forced to block everything out of your mind and pay attention to every single word that is being said. Television, similarly, if you notice these series, these like 6 to 10 episode series on cable, they move forward, they move backwards in different time sequences. They will have many characters. Sometimes they'll have the same scene being told in different points of view. And there are shows, I know you've all had this experience, where you'll have your phone on, your laptop open, and you're sort of watching the TV, and the ones where you have to, whoa, stop, put the screens down and rewind, those are the ones that force you to engage and force you to be fully immersed in the story. And that is what we want from entertainment. We want to be forced to turn off our cell phones and turn off our computers, because then we really escape. Then we really forget about our lives and become immersed in this other story and feel something we normally don't feel, think about things we don't think about. So I think that this genre, by creating this unreliable narrator and by writing in the first person, does that. You can't just take what's being said for granted. You can't just, okay, this is happening, facts, action sequence, little romance, building love story. It doesn't work that way. At any moment, you could be lied to. At any moment, your narrator could be deceiving himself or herself because of a mental illness or because of denial. You have to pay attention on many different levels. And what's so interesting to me as a writer in writing first person is that you can use all of these tools to give information on different levels. So perfect example would be, your narrator says, walking down Main Street, it's a beautiful day, I feel happy. Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways you could say that. You could write it in one long flowing paragraph with a lot of descriptions of how beautiful it was. And you'll read that and think, yeah, it is a beautiful day and he really is happy, and then you'll move along. Or you could write it in short, broken sentences with line breaks after each one. You could use short, very terse words that are really inconsistent with a beautiful day and feeling happy. Walking down Main Street, the sun was out, it was hot, beautiful day, I feel happy. Then, your brain is sort of saying, wait a minute, he doesn't sound very happy, and he's using words that aren't really happy words or feel-good words. And those tools then send this subliminal message to the reader that they need to wonder why he's not happy, but why is he telling me he is? Is he in denial? Is he trying to lie to me? Anyway, it gives you multiple layers to work with in crafting the story, and I think that's part of what makes them so engaging. So I took that formula and I married it with this concept that I had come across about memory science, which I'm going to talk about just for a few minutes because I think it's really, really fascinating. Years before, I had read an article in the New York Times about the treatment of trauma with morphine, and what they were seeing through studies was that soldiers in the field who had been given high doses of morphine right after some sort of trauma had lower rates of PTSD. And they backed into it and asked the question, why would that be? Around the same time, they started to understand how memories are stored in our brains. And they used to think they were stored in like a cluster of synapses all together, like one memory. And then they discovered that was wrong, actually, that memories are stored in many different neurons throughout the brain that are responsible for different senses: sight, sound, temperature, relationships of the people that you're with when it happens. And that when you go to recall a memory, your brain has to find the relevant parts and bring them all into focus. So if you're remembering, a sunny day in your childhood when you were playing with your best friend, your brain's got to go and find the feel of sunshine, remember the friend's face, remember your emotion, maybe remember a conversation that would be in the language part, and it has to pull all of that in. So putting those things together, they hypothesized that the morphine was actually altering the physical and therefore the emotional response and memory that was being formed from this event. So as the memory was going from like the short term to long term, which takes, they don't know exactly how long, but if you've had a trauma, it could take longer than a few minutes, more than a few hours. But there's a period of time in which it has to go from the time the event happens, the short-term memory, into the long-term storage. And if that emotional component has been altered with a drug, it will go into storage altered. It will go into storage in the state it was when your brain was going to file it in the long-term memory. So when I was reading this, and they were hypothesizing about using these types of drugs, painkillers and things that sort of mitigate pain and emotional pain and physical pain right after a trauma, and they said, well, this might have use in the civilian world. And my first thought was, what about a victim of a crime? Because as a lawyer, and most of everybody kind of knows this from our culture, if you give a witness a drug that's intended to alter his or her memory, that testimony is probably going to actually be inadmissible. It will probably be deemed to be so unreliable as a matter of law that it won't even be allowed to be heard. And if it is allowed, it will be, torn apart because you've been given a drug to alter your memory. So that story, that concept was in my mind for a few years, actually, but I wasn't writing thrillers, so I didn't quite know what to do with it. So when I had this chance, I was given this sort of free pass to write in this new genre. This was the story I knew that I had to tell. So I went in, I started doing research, and I have to say one of the greatest things about writing now is that everything is online. And people ask me how long it took to do research. I literally can sit there with one screen on the book and one screen on Google, and like, oh, what would the FBI do if they came upon a blah, blah, blah? Look it up, it's right there. What does the FBI call the blah, 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 and the blah, blah? There it is, FBI jargon. I mean, it's really amazing to have these tools. And with science, you can actually get medical research, you can get the actual studies, not just, you can get articles summarizing them, but you can pull up the actual study that the doctors are sending to each other, and you can read it. It's amazing. So I started doing this research, and it totally freaked me out, and I actually had to recraft my story because I wanted to use so much of what I was reading about memory science. So in those interim years from I think 2010 until I wrote this book in 2015, they had taken those concepts and developed actual treatments. So now they are actually treating patients who have had traumas by bringing them into a therapeutic setting, having them recall a horrible traumatic event. Like, one woman, was childhood sexual assault in her home by a relative. Someone else, it was the loss of a child in a horrible car accident. They will remember these traumatic events under the influence of a drug. And some therapists are using ecstasy, some are using like oxycodone and morphine-based products. Some are using fentanyl, which is an anesthetic. And over time, they're finding that while that memory is being recalled, it can actually be altered. And so the emotional component gets altered because the memory is being recalled in a very calm state. And over time, the emotional component goes back less traumatized, less charged. And these patients have reported incredible success in alleviating the PTSD associated with the trauma. So this is the part of it that is really, I think, fascinating. I'm sure everyone in this room has had the experience where you have been with a relative, probably your mother. most people tell me it was their mother, and she will be talking about something that happened in your childhood, and it'll be totally wrong, and you'll be like, that never happened. And then your sister or your brother will be like, yeah, it didn't happen that way, it happened this other way. And you're like, no, it never happened at all. And your mother's, and you're all sitting there like, could somebody play back the tape? Because everyone at that table is actually remembering that event the way that they are telling you. They're not lying, but what has happened is that over time, the memory has been changed. They call it reconsolidation. And they now know that every single time you remember anything, it actually gets slightly altered. And so this is why they think this happens. Memories are really only valuable to us if they are informing us how to survive going forward, right? I mean, as just basic human instinct and survival, we don't really need to hold on to stuff that's not going to help us stay safe, get food, know who to trust, who not to trust. So let's say you had something happen in Alaska when you were 10, and now you've lived in Florida for 15 years. That memory, the cold part, will probably get less important. And you may actually, when you remember it, not remember first how cold it was, because that's not really important to you anymore. And your brain is sort of saying, yeah, I'm hearing cold, but it's 95 degrees, and it's been that way for a long time. So maybe we don't really need this part of the memory that's telling us it's freezing cold. And instead, maybe the focus of the memory will be on something else, and the cold piece will get warmer. We also do it emotionally, and this is what happens in families, right? So let's say your mother's remembering that, this wonderful Thanksgiving that she gave everyone. And you'll remember that she burned the turkey, and your sister will remember that that everybody had gotten into a fight about something. And your mother has probably reconsolidated and altered that memory to remove the burned turkey and the fight that everybody had, because those things were emotionally painful, and over time, that part of the memory went away. So there's a lot of different reasons that that our memories get altered, but they do get altered. So all of that brings me to the book. I wanted to set up a concept that would stretch these sort of conflicting moral repercussions of memory science to the limit. So I knew I wanted a crime. I wanted to pose this question of what if you had to choose between forgetting a horrible crime and possibly being able to get justice for that crime. And the other thing I wanted to do was to think about, what does it mean to be the victim of a crime? Is it just the factual memory of the events, or is there something else about being violated, being assaulted, having your freedom taken from you, feeling powerless? Do those things exist just having the knowledge that this crime has happened to you? So I took those two concepts and I created my character, Jenny Kramer, who is a teenager who is brutally assaulted at a small house party in a small suburb. And so therefore could be anyone at the high school, could be, but possibly someone from this small town. And her parents are given the opportunity to give her this experimental drug that may actually block all of the memories from going into storage at all. So it would be, the equivalent of a blackout drunk or a roofie or something like that, but they could give it after the incident has happened, before it goes into long-term storage. So the mother wants to give her this drug, and she becomes a main character in the book. She wants everything to go back to the way it was. It's very important to her that her world not be shattered, and that everything, be perfect. The father is very concerned about justice. He feels that, he failed to protect his child. It's this primal instinct that he wants vengeance for what's been done to his daughter and to his family. But the mother wins out, and they give her the drug, and she wakes up not remembering any of the facts. So the book sort of takes off from there, and it examines all of these issues. What does it mean to be the victim of a crime? Well, doesn't matter that she doesn't remember the facts. She still knows that this has happened to her, and she still suffers those same feelings of having been violated, having been rendered powerless, feeling insecure, feeling she can't trust people, feeling vulnerable. And we have experienced in our society, in the past year and a half, incidents where this has happened. We have heard stories about women who have been attacked, don't have any factual memory, or have some memory, but it's, under the influence of alcohol, and someone remembers it differently. What we're finding from the testimonials of those women is that the factual memory is only one component. The knowledge that this happened to them is still causing tremendous emotional pain. So that takes Jenny on this journey of emotional trauma after she wakes up and doesn't remember what's happened. The other component is the justice. So her father goes on a mission to find who did this, and it eats him up inside. He's the fact that she can't identify the attacker or provide any help in finding him is a journey that he goes on, and his backstory and his childhood are brought up to try to examine what's driving that inside of him. And then the journey for Jenny becomes about trying to recover her memory, to see if she can then put the pieces together and find some closure. But it's all of that science aside, it's actually a very suspenseful novel. It's written in a way that I tried to sort of take psychological thrillers and put them on some steroids. So what I did is I created my unreliable narrator, but instead of him just telling you everything that's going on, he actually gives you the actual words from the conversations he's had with all of the characters. So you're getting large chunks of their voices throughout the book, so you get to know them on their level and not just through his eyes. And the other thing I did was I tried to bring in those pieces in an organic way, the way that you would hear a story from a friend. So, when you're sitting down to dinner with a friend and your friend will start like, oh my God, I was in the coffee room today and Bob came in the coffee room, and she'll look at you for a reaction and you're like, yeah, I'm not getting it. Maybe I need more wine, I don't know, but Bob in the coffee room. Okay, well, but this is why. Bob got fired 2 days ago, and he was escorted out by the security officers. Now, your friend will see your eyes light up, and now she knows she can go forward, right, with the story. And we do this intuitively when we're talking to people. We give you just enough of the backstory so that you can find the level of interest that the teller of the story thinks is appropriate at that time. But now you don't need to know everything about Bob. You don't need to know his whole childhood and everything else. You just need enough to know why it's interesting he's in the coffee room. Then the story progresses a little more. Well, then, Judy came in the coffee room. And, again, you're like, okay, okay, well, this is why Bob and Judy were having an affair. Judy's husband found out. That's why he was fired. And now you're like, okay, that's interesting. Now I'm hooked. And then the story moves forward. So I tried to take that model and make the book feel like this conversation or this storytelling that you would have in that kind of organic way, where you're like, waiter, go away. I haven't looked at the menu. I just got to find out what happened in that coffee room. Because now you're invested, right? Now you care about these characters. So there was a very deliberate structure to the book in many ways. There's a lot of the science in the book. And the other thing, the last thing that I want to touch on is that I tried, because I was writing about sexual assault, I wanted to not be gratuitous, but I wanted to also avoid glossing over what sexual assault is. I did not want to be, that story where if you closed your eyes, you wouldn't be able to tell if someone was being assaulted or having the time of her life. I mean, we've all seen television shows like that where, it's sort of sexualized to make it easier for us to stomach. So I did a lot of research reading testimonials of survivors of sexual assault. I read in their words how they described the things that happened to them, how they described their emotions, what words they used to describe body parts, to describe the physical actions that were happening, their wounds, everything. And because I wanted to use their language, and I wanted to try to find that line between having it be, gratuitously graphic, but then being glossed over and sexualized. I wanted to write about it the way I would write about someone being stabbed or shot or beaten and tortured or whatever. I mean, we read in thrillers, people get hurt and murdered or whatever. And I wanted the book to read the way it would read if it was not sexual assault, but a different kind of crime that didn't have so much charge in our culture. So that was another aspect of the research that I did. So that is pretty much my whole story. The next book is, I'm finishing it this week, actually. I'm gonna hit print on Friday and read through. I just finished a revision. It's about 2 teenage girls who disappear one night, and 5 years later, only one comes back. And she tells us where she's been and what led up to the disappearance. So that's it.
Fascinating.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful talk. That was very provocative, all of it, I thought, instructive and provocative. So who among you has a question for Wendy? How could you not have a million questions? Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So why did I start writing a novel without knowing what I was doing? I guess it was maybe a little bit of hubris. I thought, well, I write. I mean, I write all the time for the law. I write briefs, and I read. And why shouldn't I be able to just look at how somebody else did something, and sort of put in my own story and do it that way? And yes, I learned a valuable lesson that there actually is a craft to it, a mechanical craft that is, it's good to learn, like, learning to ski or learn anything like that. Like there are some actual things that sometimes look easy are not as easy as they appear. Yeah.
You spoke. Okay. You spoke a little bit about women fiction, and then I also overheard you talking about the covers of your earlier book. Yes. And how you felt like it undermined this text that you were making. How do you feel like being a woman has influenced your career?
Oh boy. Publishing it's interesting. There's almost all the people I work with are women, and many readers of fiction are women. Most readers of fiction are actually women. But I do find it odd that a story about, women's lives gets sort of shoved into this category of women's fiction, and then there's sort of a push to make it more sort of sexy and scandalous and funny and light but sexy, and that was frustrating. That was frustrating. I feel I don't know if it would have been different if I was a male writer, or if the stories were more about male characters. But I do think that that there is a gravitational pull of all stories that are focused on women's lives to be, pulled into the women's fiction genre and given a lighter feel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh gosh, I forgot the most exciting part. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
Leave something for him to read.
Yeah, no, this is the best part. Okay, so the happy end to my story is that I finished the novel in 10 weeks because I had to take time off from practicing law. And by then I sort of had my own little fledgling firm, so I was able to just not take any new clients, and because this was going to be my last book before I, mourned this dream and made sure my children, turned out not to be crazy, trying to, be, I don't know, well, they may be magicians one day. My son wants to be a magician, and he may be a magician one day. But I wrote it in 10 weeks. That's all I did was write this book and write and research all, at the same time. And I gave it to my agent, and we did one small revision on the ending, which was actually much darker than it was. But I kind of knew that, so I sort of made it so I could slip in the lighter ending, which if you've read the book, you're probably wondering how much darker it could get. But believe me, it could get really dark. And she sold it in. We had a preemptive offer in 2 days, and then 4 days later, she quadrupled it. It was going from, what my career had been and, crying for days and, just despair, to have that kind of validation was, no, I didn't. You know what, we almost did, but so this is what happened. So we shopped it out with my initials, I think G.G. Walker or something, and because my full name is Gwendolyn. And no one knew if it was a man or a woman writing it. My agent wouldn't tell any of the editors, so they had to bid on it without knowing who I was. And then 2 days later, the foreign contracts started coming in. We're up to 22 foreign languages now. And then also the attachment offer from Reese Witherspoon. So I actually got to talk to Reese Witherspoon for 45 minutes. It was very exciting. Not George Clooney, but she's awesome too. So. She loves the character Charlotte. I could go on and on about Charlotte. The mother is a very complex character, which I think everyone will identify with. She's got these two components to her, good Charlotte, bad Charlotte, and it's all about how we go through life, trying to choose one path and having to shove our other pieces that don't fit into that one life we've chosen, and if you don't choose wisely, the other pieces get upset, and she has a big other piece that's sort of rattling her cage. But anyway, she loved Charlotte, so she attached, and then they got Warner Brothers involved, and they bought the option. So I think within 10 days, I had sold the U.S. rights, a bunch of foreign rights, and the movie option, and it was a game changer. But that being said, people are like, "Oh, you must be so happy." I feel almost more anxious now than before because I feel like I'm holding on white-knuckled. When you've wanted something for so long and then someone finally gives you that chance and you don't want to screw it up. So I've been working as hard as I can work. I've been, I wrote the next novel and really holding on tight. So, and the script I understand is written. They kind of keep authors, unless you're John Grisham or Scott Turow, you're kind of like this, not getting involved in the movie. And they kind of know what they're doing. And this story The way the book is written, I honestly don't know. For me, the way I think about this book, trying to figure out how to make it a film would have been very, very difficult. So it's great it has fresh eyes, and so I have not seen the script, but I have absolute confidence that it will be wonderful. It was written by a really good screenwriter.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
One more, and then we'll.
I try not to read while I'm trying to write, because you sort of start taking on the cadence and the language of the other author, especially if you like it. And so I didn't really read them. What I sort of looked through them, chapters and characters, and I deconstructed them on a structural level. And eventually I did read Gone Girl, and now I've read a bunch of books that are coming out, people, authors wanting sort of advanced reader copy blurbs and things like that. But mostly what I had read before were legal thrillers, the sort of old school John Grisham thrillers, and then not a lot in between, really just writing and working, reading a lot of legal papers. But now I'm reading a lot. I'm reading a lot in this genre, and I'm loving it. So, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Oh, so yes, is there, in addition to wanting to have commercial success, was there a desire to have some some themes and bigger issues? 100%. And actually, all of my books have they start with an issue, and I build the characters around them. So the issue in this book really is this question that I think we are going to have to face of what would you choose if given the choice between forgetting and possibly seeking justice. And then I took it a step further and said, what would you choose for your child? Because as a parent, you can live with the consequences of your own choices, but to have your child have to live with the consequences of decisions you make for her, that's big, heady kind of stuff. So and then as the book progressed, all these other issues with the characters, their backgrounds, I mean, there's so much stuff in there about parenting and how our childhoods just chase us through our lives and shape us, and it's very, very issue-driven.
I want to thank Wendy for a wonderful talk. I found it wonderful. I'm sure you did. And she will be here willing to sign a book for you, inscribe a book for you. It's a wonderful gift to give. In the meanwhile, the rest of you can go back. There are refreshments, coffee and cookies from Butterfield or whatever they are. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.